AfriKili family and Global P.A.C Nation, welcome to the Global P.A.C show. I'm your host, Tony Fumu Simba. It is once again a pleasure for me to be right here today in front of you for another edition of our show on this beautiful Wednesday, February the 5th, 2025. Let me start by saying Wakanda Forever. Now, you must have certainly seen this before if you were a movie aficionado. But even if you don't like movies, I mean, come on. This Wakanda Forever was so prominently featured across our societies globally. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm sure you've heard it somewhere. If not, you've read it somewhere because there are so many t-shirts going around with the whole Wakanda Forever. Well, here's the deal. Wakanda was depicting a fictitious African location, the country of Wakanda, the kingdom of Wakanda. But it brought such an immense source of pride, black pride, but also just a lot of people being proud about the African continent. Suddenly, Africa, that typically does not elicit so much desire to be connected to it, but this Wakanda Forever from the movie Black Panther just brought so much pride. Now, how is it that we go from there? And when we talk about Africa just in general, it seems like that sense of excitement seems to go down. Why is that? Why isn't the real Africa eliciting as much passion, as much love, as much enthusiasm as Wakanda did? Well, here's the deal. I believe that Wakanda is actually Africa. Now, on the fictitious side, if you look at the map in the movie, it just so happens that that kingdom was somewhere located in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Central Africa. But on a more serious note, Africa is Wakanda, or Africa has everything to be Wakanda. And I believe that by acting strategically, not only can we build a real-life Wakanda in Africa, but we can turn the continent into an immense source of pride, but also a tangible tool or a tangible destination to improve the situation of the entire Global P.A.C, the Global Pan-African community. Many people have seen it, and it's about time that Africans and the African diaspora, the Global Pan-African Diaspora, also sees that, but also seizes the moment. So there you have it. That will be the topic of our discussion today. But before we get started, let me just begin by thanking every single one of you. Thank you to those who are tuning in these shows. We're now in week 3 of the launch of this Global P.A.C show, of this live show that comes to you between Monday and Thursday. We've been bringing you the English version of the live show on Mondays and Wednesdays, and the French version on Tuesday and Thursdays. Fridays on the weekend, we haven't had a live, so we're working on bringing you long format interviews, and we have the first one that is being recorded and being prepared that will be coming to you, I believe, by the end of this week. So, and nevertheless, thank you for the support. Thank you to every single one of you who subscribes to the channel. And to those of you who have not, let me ask you to just take a quick moment to click on the subscribe button. Only takes a minute, not even a minute, it takes a second. But it will help me tremendously. It will help this platform tremendously as we grow. And as I believe that 2025 will be a year that will see this Global P.A.C platform and the AfriKili platform take off and really grow into great heights. So thank you for your support. Please continue supporting, share, comment, send your feedback and comment. Also go on the website, www.afrikili.com, which is our blog, so you can enter email and get the latest version of the latest installment of the blog. There you have it. Let's go straight into it. All right. So let's start with the whole Wakanda Forever, which, as I mentioned in the introduction, is a concept, right, that came through the Black Panther movie first in 2018, and then later on the Wakanda Forever movie in 2020. And those movies, 2022, I'm sorry, those movies, as I mentioned, were such an immense source of black pride. I mean, it was unbelievable. It's like when Wakanda Forever, first of all, when Black Panther was released, for somebody like me who was of African origin, it was just fascinating to see how a movie that was depicting a fictitious country, but a country in Africa nevertheless, could elicit so much enthusiasm. I mean, you looked left and right, you had Wakanda t-shirts, you had people, wearing Black Panther, whether you were going in the inner cities in Atlanta, in California, in Chicago, whether you look at Europe, you look in the Caribbean, across the board, people were proud of that. So it's as if that movie came as some kind of vindication, right? For people who just longed to be proud about Africa. And so finally, here was something that was depicting Africa, granted fictitiously, but still depicting Africa in such a positive light, in a powerful light, talking about kings and queens, powerful warriors, a winning formula. So everybody suddenly gravitated to that, but also not only black people, beyond that, you had white people, you had Asian. I mean, it was just such a magnificent sight to see. And a quick parenthesis, again, shout out to the main actor who started the first Black Panther movie, none other than Chadwick-Boseman. May his soul rest in peace, because unfortunately he left us on August 28, 2020, at the tender age of 43 years old, dying from cancer. So may his soul rest in peace. But he did such a magnificent job as the main actor in the initial Black Panther movie, because the sequel, the Wakanda Forever, obviously he had already passed, and so he wasn't an actor in that movie. But also another shout out to HBCUs, right? Historically black colleges and universities, because Chadwick-Boseman studied theater at the Howard University in Washington, D.C. And so another shout out to HBCUs. Another proof again that HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, clearly are capable of producing tremendous talent across the board. And that's not even an argument. Anyways, you look at people like Thurgood Marshall, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Kamala Harris, etc., etc. So HBCUs are another source of pride, should be another source of pride for all black people. But shout out to Chadwick-Boseman. I just wanted to make that quick note. Really, may his soul rest in peace. But anyhow, as I was saying, so you have this fictitious concept, right? Wakanda. Everybody's proud. Suddenly Africa is something you want to associate yourself. Not just saying Africa, people are saying Wakanda, but indirectly, Wakanda represented an African kingdom, right? An African country. So why is it that we go from a concept that takes the world by storm, grossing over $2 billion, the Black Panther movies, Wakanda Forever, grossing over $2 billion across the world. We go from that, and then when we look at it on the flip side, when you remove the Wakanda and you only have Africa left, then suddenly the continent is no longer an exciting place to be associated with. Rather than pride, it would appear that many times Africa becomes almost like a continent that many people of African descent in the diaspora and others are no longer proud to be associated with, in large part. But why is that? Why is that the case? And you might say the diaspora, but I would say sometimes even just African immigrants, right? People of African origin, first generation. I can take my case, for example, as I was going through my schooling growing up in the country of Belgium. I remember as I was arriving in Belgium, joining my schools and so on, there was in my subconscious somewhere when I was still very young, a bit of an apprehension sometimes. In Europe, granted, if you're black, it's not like the United States and other places where your skin does not necessarily reflect that you're of a foreign origin. In Europe, it's different, right? When you're black, at least at that time, now you have second, third generations and so on. but most likely you are a foreigner, you're somebody from Africa. But on the back of our mind, there was this thing, because when you spoke to many Europeans who had no connection with Africa, even many of my friends would constantly make fun of Africa, talk about how Africa was, people living on trees, just things that are ridiculous. Me coming from Africa, I knew that was not the truth. But yet you had the majority of people who had no connection to Africa, have never been to Africa, but had a preconception about Africa, right? Thinking that Africa essentially was a land of savages, people living on trees and so on. But where were they getting that information, having never been to Africa? So it was clearly through the different narratives that are perpetrating our news media and different sources. That's clear where they obtain the information from. If not them directly, at least it was now the accepted narrative, stories being told. It gets passed down, through their families and so on. So that was the prevailing conception of Africa, and still is, from many people who have never actually been on the continent. So really, if all the images you get are negative images, right? You talk about poverty, war, and that's all you see. I mean, who in their right mind would want to be associated to such an image? Even though when you're in Africa, that is so far from the truth, right? The continent has so much to offer, such a beautiful continent, right? So much to offer. But yet, when you're from the outside and that's the only image you get, you can understand why many members of the Global PanAfrican Diaspora would not really be quick to want to be associated with Africa. And so that brings me to the point of saying image is critical, right? Narratives are critical. And personally, I've actually come to evolve a lot about with that point of view. The point of view of understanding that images are critical, because there used to be a time when I would believe, if people think a certain way, so be it. That's their business. I know that the reality is not what they think, and then I'll just move on. But no. I really have evolved a lot into that when it comes to certain things. Not everything, if you're just a third party, you're just have a unsubstantiated opinion about me or something. I mean, really, it doesn't. It's like water over feathers, right? It doesn't do me anything at all. Nevertheless, when we're seeking change, like for example, we understand that Africa has a lot to offer, but a lot of coordination and collaboration needs to happen to have that work, to work towards changing some of the situations in Africa, but also just our conditions, the large situation of the Global PanAfrican Diaspora, whether it's in the Caribbean, in America, and so on. The image is very, very important. It's kind of like, if as people judge you, the way somebody judges you, somebody meets you in that first couple of seconds, kind of has a perception about you. Well, that perception, whether it is real or not, whether it represents you substantially or not, well, that perception will guide a lot of interactions. And if the perception is not does not correctly represent you, it might take a lot of effort to change that, right? Which is why, again, I was saying that image is very, very important. On the same line of ideas, when we talk about people not wanting to associate with the African continent because of maybe a negative image that they perceive from Africa, there's the saying that goes, right? It's, well, success has many fathers or many parents, but failure is an orphan, right? Success has many parents, failure is an orphan. Or there's also this other saying that says that a king never steps down from its throne. If you want the king's throne, you will have to wrestle it and take it away, generally speaking. But the whole idea here is that when there's a positive image, when there's a winning image, right? When there's a successful image, people will tend to clamor. People will tend to really fight, to want to associate themselves to it. I mean, look at, for example, you have people from European descent many times. If there's any sort of lineage to some far-off king somewhere in Europe, they'll say, oh, I'm a descendant of Charlemagne. I'm a descendant of King such and such. Because, again, success has many parents. Failure is an orphan. So it really behooves us to figure out a way to transform the whole narrative of Africa into a successful narrative that will incite people to want to know more, to want to associate with that. And so we can finally change the condition. And brothers and sisters, that is a very urgent thing to say, to do, all right? And this does not only concern Africans, continental Africans, but this is really something for the whole G-PAC, the whole Global PanAfrican community. And I'll explain myself. And when I talk about the urgency, the time is now. And surprisingly, right, if you look across Africa, it seems like everybody has understood that Wakanda is actually there. Like wealth is there, the potential is there, and people are scrambling to position themselves to have prime positions across the African continent. I was just reading a report not too long ago about the United Arab Emirates. Who would have thought? But today, the United Arab Emirates is kind of fighting hard to position itself as a lead investor across the African continent, trying to invest in all kind of positions, infrastructure, you name it. Countries such as Turkey, scrambling for partnerships across Africa. You have China, scrambling to position itself across Africa. As all these nations fight for positioning on the African continent, it is clearly not for the beautiful eyes of African, even though I believe the Africans are very beautiful, but it is beyond that, obviously. It is all economic interest. So you will hear all these saying from the Chinese companies and government, Turkish, United Arab Emirates, you name it, talking about how their partnership is a win-win partnership, how they will have transfer of knowledge, all sort of beautiful things to incite Africans to establish a strong those partnership with them. But I understand that in the long run, they are doing it primarily for their interest. Right? If Africa was not such an important location for their own interest, they would rather stay in their own continents. Not that long ago, you saw how President Biden, before he stepped down, how he made it a point to travel to the country of Angola, because there was that corridor called the Lobito Corridor being built, which is a railroad with millions of dollars designed to take natural resources from the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then with the railroad using trains, right, for the resources to be evacuated from that region all the way to the port on the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, Biden understood American interests are very critical. So it is very urgent, again, brothers and sisters, for us, Black people, whether we're Africans from the continent, Black people from the diaspora, first generation immigrant, whether we're in the Caribbean and so on, turning Africa into the real Wakanda, meaning a real prosperous location, is of crucial importance for the well-being of all Black people around the world. And here we should not fall into the trap of gradualism, saying, well, I mean, it will take time. No, we need to adopt an urgent mindset. When I hear gradualism, people will tell you, and we need to take it gradually, right? One step at a time. It's kind of like, what Dr. Martin Luther King said in his letter from Birmingham. As he was responding to the newspaper, and there was a passage in which he's saying, there was the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. So essentially, people want to advance gradualism, telling you to go in incremental approach, go gradually, is really to advance the status quo. It is people who want to maintain the right, not to advance your right. We have to be cognizant about that, all right? So this is not about gradualism anymore. There's urgency. There is urgency, and we need to attack the problem in an urgent manner, and in a unified and in a coordinated manner. Because that economic, I would say, empowerment, which is why Dr. King, again, I will bring him up. Dr. King used to, towards the end of his life, kind of shifted a lot of his approach, now putting what he would call economic justice. And he would say, essentially, the idea was that economic justice was central to just equality, generally speaking. And so started being involved with a lot of matters related to economic justice. Well, to me, I'm going to replace the word economic justice by saying economic empowerment. All right. Economic empowerment. So economic empowerment is essential if we want to address many of the inequalities that the Global P.A.C has been subjected to over centuries. Economic empowerment. Because whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not, guess what? Money talks and BS walks. All right? Economics are essential. Finances are essential, which is why one of the pillars of AfriKili and the Global P.A.C is finance, businesses. The other pillars being history and political participation. But economic participation, economic empowerment, finance understanding, financial literacy, business promotion, entrepreneurship, everything related to economic advancement, economic empowerment is crucial if we want to advance our mission, which our overall mission being to build bridges and strong coalitions in the Global P.A.C, which is the Global Pan-African Community. So build global Pan-African coalitions. That is key. Without money, we might as well forget it. Now, let me just kind of start concluding here. I've painted a negative picture about shame and so on, saying that, people don't want to be associated with Africa. People are ashamed of Africa. Clearly, that's not, that was just a gross generalization. That's obviously not everybody. Clearly, if you're from Africa, most of the time now you are proud of your continent. And I'm very proud of being of African origin. Even though I'm not a proponent of the shameful borders across the African continent that were drawn not by Africans, those borders that were drawn during the scramble of Africa by foreign powers during the Berlin Conference, which initially was called the Congo Conference for 1884. Nevertheless, I was born in this country, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I'm a proud African. So many people are proud of Africa, and even in the diaspora. I mean, you look, I mentioned the whole Wakanda Forever, but it started before that, right in the 60s during the whole Black Panther, Black Power movement. You had dashikis, right? Dashikis are a traditional African church starting to permeate across North America as a sign of revolution, people really wanting to reconnect to their roots. More recently, I mean, you've seen there's been a big wave of celebrities, whether it's, Oprah Winfrey, whether it's Beyonce in many of her collaboration with African artists, her putting forth some African fashion and so on. We've seen the fashion industry with African fashion, growing and coming to the forefront. Look at the entertainment industry, music. We have the Afro beats, which are sounds of African origin, just kind of permeating across the world. You had people like Stevie Wonder. I remember one of the interviews he did with Oprah Winfrey when he said he wanted to relocate to Africa. I actually also did a series of videos on the AfriKili YouTube channel called Blaxit. So Blaxit, Blaxit, which stands for Black Exit, which is a movement where you have many people of African descent in the global diaspora deciding to leave the Western world, whether it's in the United States of America, Europe, and relocating to Africa. You had a whole movement in 2024 and so on, the year of the return in Ghana, where Ghana welcomed a lot of diaspora members. So the point here is that it is not all negative. Not everybody is ashamed to be connected to Africa. There's a lot of reconnection to Africa. There's a recent conference in Brazil. You see communities in Brazil. Brazil being the country with the highest number of Black people outside of Africa, because you had a direct slave connection, unfortunately, during the the transatlantic slave trade. Because if you look, Brazil and the Congo, they're essentially on the same line, right? So you had a lot of slaves being taken from the Congo and taken into Brazil, which is why in Brazil you have a strong culture of Congolese heritage. You have, for example, Zumbi dos Palmares, Zumbi, who is celebrated in Brazil. There's actually a national holiday celebrating Zumbi, who was a leader of a Chilombo, which was essentially one of the people like saying kingdoms today, but he essentially was the leader of, we would say, the resistance of Black people, areas that had high concentration of Black people that would run away from slavery and so on. Well, Zumbi, which is actually a name that comes from the Congo, comes from Nzambi, which means God. So anyways, so you have a lot of communities, Colombia, to name it. I mean, so there is definitely a trend of people and cultures and communities that really want to reconnect to their African ancestral roots. You have also DNA services, right? There was one that I saw not too long ago about African ancestry, where you send in your DNA samples and it helps identify where your ancestors may have come from. So the effort is there, but more certainly need to be done. Because despite all that I'm saying, you still have a large swath of people out there that do not want anything to do with Africa. And it's all based on the image and the perception that they would see of Africa. You see people in Latin America. You have people, some places say that they don't want to do anything with Africa. Even in the United States, you have some people within our African American communities that might not have the necessary information about Africa and just don't want to be connected with the continent. So on that note, if the refusal is based on a negative perception of Africa, if that's the reason for that, then it behooves us to work even harder, rather to reform that and change the image. So we need to bombard the airwaves with positive imagery about Africa. Platforms such as this one, AfriKili, Global P.A.C. Again, if you have not subscribed, please take the time now. Hit the subscribe button. Only takes 1 second. Just hit so you remain connected to this movement as we grow or join other movements. So we need to really bombard, as I say, the airwaves with positive imagery about Black people in general, Africa also in particular. If we have access to bigger news outlet. So a concerted PR effort needs to be done to change the image, the negative image that many people have of Africa. It is absolutely critical, because once people no longer have those shackles or those, no longer have that resistance, right, to be connected to Africa, then people are more open to collaborate, to work hand in hand towards building that real Wakanda on the African continent. Because guess what? As I like to say, you might not be born in Africa, right? Maybe you're from the Caribbean. You're African American for generation. The culture you have developed outside of Africa is definitely to be valued and cherished. Never forget that. So you are absolutely right to cling on to the culture that your ancestors developed in the country in which you are after departing from Africa. So you're in the Caribbean, you're in the Americas, you were anywhere outside of Africa. Nevertheless, you must understand that a lot of the common heritage that we have in terms of Black people across the world, a lot of the issues that we faced, a big part comes from the fact that Africa had also been weakened, first through the slave trade, but also through a lot of the colonialism efforts. So we also have systems that have weakened Africa. And on the flip side, if Africa is strong, economically speaking, politically speaking, in terms of education and so on, the strength of that continent will be an immense source of strength for Black people across the world, wherever they are, even if they don't relocate physically to Africa. But having that entity to advocate, demand change powerfully, that would change the situation. People like Malcolm X already understood that back then. You know, we like to associate Malcolm X, as we should, to the struggle for the rights of black people in the United States of America. But he was deeply a deep Pan-Africanist. It started with his parents, Malcolm X's parents, that were followers of Marcus Garvey. And so Malcolm X grew up attending meetings and so on. But once his father was assassinated, he stopped, going with the UNIA meetings that were led by Marcus Garvey and his people. But later on, after he came out of jail, started reading, and then he went to Africa. He reconnected to the African continent and understood how a strong Africa would be instrumental to the advancement of not only Africans on the continent who would be the first beneficiaries, but also all black people across the world. And so that also means that for people that are on the African continent, it is important to understand that our continent has suffered from a brain drain for so long, right? First, again, we had people that were forcefully removed from the continent through the transatlantic slave trade. And then in the more recent times, we have an immense brain drain with professionals, educated professionals and so on, that have left Africa, that are now thriving in the United States of America, in Europe, in Asia, you name it. Well, that capacity alone, if canalized correctly, would be an immense human capital to help build that true Wakanda on the African continent. Aside from that brain drain, we also have our brothers and sisters that were born in the diaspora or whose ancestors left the continent 400 years ago or so, have developed additional capacity that can also be utilized to advance the continent. But by building strong coalitions and collaboration is the only way we'll be able to do it. And then we'll also have the platforms to continuously push strong narratives, the positive stories about Africa, reforming the image about Africa and motivating people to work towards a strong Africa, but also coalitions in the diaspora that are much needed. So that is absolutely key. Now, one quick note here, I'm certainly not saying that everything is positive in Africa, because that clearly would be a lie. I'm not saying that poverty does not exist in Africa. It does. I'm not saying that wars are not a reality in Africa. They are. I mean, just last week alone, I spent a lot of time speaking about the war in Goma, which unfortunately has caused the loss, a very sad loss of life. It's a reality. I'm not saying that disease are not a reality. There are some realities, but they're certainly not the whole picture. There's way more than that. I mean, what place in the world does not have some of those ills, if not all of them? You want to talk about disease and poverty? Does that not exist in the West? Does that not exist in the United States of America? In the Caribbean? So problems exist everywhere, structural problems and otherwise. And if we decide just to focus on that, we'll never move the needle. So we also need to focus on the success stories. There are many, many success stories. As a matter of fact, the series of interviews that will be coming on this platform, the number one goal of those interviews will be to educate, right, to inspire, but also to provide a new success narrative, a different success narrative, because there's so many successful individuals that have succeeded on the continent, in the diaspora, and by collaborating, by joining forces. So you have people joining forces from the continent, in the diaspora, and vice versa. A lot of success stories, and we need to work on putting them forward. So there you have it. I mean, action is needed, right? Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? I brought you a quote by Frederick Douglass, who said he prayed for 20 years without seeing any answer until he decided to pray with his legs. In other words, when he started going, and when it is through action that through change came. So action is mandatory if we want to change that, and if we want to build a real Wakanda in Africa. Because Africa is already Wakanda, but it hasn't been polished yet. It's kind of like that diamond that just needs to be, polished, or maybe it's already polished and there's only dust on it. So we need to wipe the dust off so it can, have that shine again and become the true Wakanda. And we can really say Wakanda forever, Africa forever, wherever we are in the world, and have perfect connection or great unity between the global Pan-African diaspora and the motherland in the continent. All right, as has become the tradition, I will end with a quote today. Our quotes are designed to inspire, provide guidance, just motivate. I believe in doing that. And so today's inspiration, since we are in the whole Black Panther theme, I will bring the one and only King T'Challa. All right, ChadwickBoseman. Again, may his soul rest in peace. So he's the guy I'm going to quote today to end our show. And so this great quote from ChadwickBoseman says, "Purpose crosses disciplines. Purpose is an essential element of you. It is the reason you are on the planet in this particular time in history." Purpose, brothers and sisters. Finding your purpose is essential. And it crosses discipline. It is an essential element of you. So there you have it. Let me remove the quote here. So I'm going to end up here. Finding our purpose. We certainly have our purpose with the G-PAC. Our purpose being to build bridges and strong coalitions within the Global PAC, within the Global Pan-African community, Global Pan-African coalitions, so that we can change the narrative, we can change the image, we can elevate the condition of all Black people across the world. And by doing so, we'll do our part in building the real Wakanda in Africa, so that Africa becomes also a source of pride for all Black people around the world. But we also change, as I said, the condition and situation of all Black people, whether in the Caribbean, in the Americas, Asia, Europe, you name it. All right, so before concluding, let me also remind you to make sure you continue supporting. Thank you, first of all, if you follow this entire show, and thank you for supporting it. And if you have not subscribed, please take the time, just 1 second, click on the subscribe button. Help us grow so that 2025 can see this G-PAC platform, AfriKili platform, rise up to new heights. I believe we'll get there. I'll do my part, and I also need your support with doing that. Thank you very much. Remember, we are strong people. We're beautiful people. We're capable people. We are special people. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. And more than anything, remember, we are the Global PAC. Asante sana. Peace be with you. And see you next time. Bye-bye.